Hey guys, and welcome to another tutorial for freshly squeezed samples. Today I'm going to be showing you how to master your track. This is part one of a 5-video series, and in this first video we're going to be looking at how to prepare our master so that an engineer who is a professional will be able to master your track properly. So let's say for the example of this video that we have a track completely finished. We're ready to get this sent off to a mastering engineer. What are the first things that we need to do? Well, number one, you want to make sure that your track is hitting at a level that is typically accepted by mastering engineers. And you might be wondering, well, what do I need to look at? Well, one of the things you can look at is loudness. So let's go ahead and play the loudest part of this track, which is probably going to be this chorus right here. So as you can see there, our track is currently right now peaking at minus 10 dB, give or take. The integrated LUFS is minus 12, and this is actually not a terrible place to start looking at volume control for our master. Now, most mastering engineers typically want you to master or send them things at around anywhere from like minus 3 to minus 6 dB. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Swiss Army meter and just kind of check where everything is at the very end of this entire mix bus chain. So right now our track is peaking at around minus 1.3, so we want to get that down to about minus 3 to minus 6. So first thing I'm going to do is I have this mix bus that I've set up, and all it has really is just a couple of EQs, and it's got a limiter on it which I'm going to delete. And I also have a compressor, which is just sort of like my own personal taste. And you know, sometimes mastering engineers will say, you know, please remove any compressors or anything like that from the master. But if it's part of your sound and if it's making your track sound in a way that is your signature sound or whatever, I wouldn't recommend taking that off. I think the main thing you want to make sure that this compressor isn't doing is clipping or removing too much headroom, because then that will allow the mastering engineer to really be able to come in and do his work. So, you know, typically on your mix bus, you want a compressor that isn't super crushing your song, right? It's not sucking the life out of it, but rather it's just slightly enhancing it, and it's just kind of taming your track in a way that is pleasant but not surgical. And that's exactly what this compressor is doing, right? So if I were to turn it on and off, let's just listen to it. So, you know, again, this compressor isn't doing something super crazy where it's just squashing the life out of my track. It's not making it sound, you know, super loud, right? I have my compressor almost hitting the same volume as it was on and off. It's just giving it a bit of a tone, a tonal difference that I appreciate, and so I want to leave that on. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, right now, let's see what our true peak is when I play the loudest part of the song. So right now it's at like minus 1.4, so let's bring that down to about minus 8 and see if we can get this true peak, or this one here, to be at minus 3. So it looks like our track is peaking at minus 4.94, which is technically minus 5, which is fine. This is a pretty good volume level, but if you really wanted to make sure what your highest peak is, then what you should do is just play your track from start to finish. Let this guy just, you know, give you the highest peak possible in the entire track, and then you'll know for sure whether or not your track is really hitting whatever it says here. You can't always just rely on the loudest part of the track, because sometimes your track might have like a really loud impact somewhere, or it might have a really loud sound that just kind of pops out, and you just didn't realize that it was creating that much of a peak. Or sometimes what can happen too is you have a lot of transients hitting at the same time, like a kick, a snare, a synth pluck, and then an effect, and then that can cause a pretty significant increase in volume. So I highly recommend you just play through your entire track, then go back to your meter and just see what it says. If it's saying that it's too loud or too low or whatever, don't worry about it. Just come in here and then figure out where that is, and then just bring down your gain volume again. Obviously here in Ableton, I'm just using the utility knob, which if you're in another DAW is nothing more than just a gain knob. And since we're working in the digital realm, it's not a huge deal that I'm using a gain knob to bring down the overall volume of my track for mastering. If let's say we're using, instead of an actual digital compressor and I was using a hardware compressor, right, then that might be a different scenario. But since most of us are working in the digital realm, this isn't too much of an issue by just coming in here and bringing down the volume and allowing us to kind of get it to that mastering peak that mastering engineers want you to send it at. The only other thing I can think of that I think would be important to point out is, if you are creating just one wave file of stem that you're going to send to a mastering engineer, then this method that I've showed you will work great. But if you are planning on sending, let's say, mix stems for a stem master, then you're going to want to split out each one of your different elements into different tracks. So what I've done here is I've created a mix A, which is like my kick and bass. I've created a mix B, which is like my synthesizers and any other melodic instrument. My mix C, which are like my just like my effects, and then mix D are any other drum, percussion, or anything else that you think would fit well in here. And so if I needed to export this as a stem master, I have it ready to go. I would just click on selected tracks only, and it would stem out mix A, B, C, and D. And then obviously if you have return effects, you also want to make sure you export these out into maybe a mix E or something like that, where you can kind of have all of these in the same track. That way whoever is mastering it will have more flexibility. And I do highly recommend stem masters, because they give the mastering engineer a lot more flexibility in the event that your track has a lot of problems. Right now, if your track is pretty well mixed, you're not running into a lot of issues, then you're 9 times out of 10 going to be fine by just sending a single wave file for your master. But if your mastering engineer comes back to you and says, hey, there's a lot of problems with the kick and the bass, or there's a lot of problems with some of the synths or some of the frequencies there, then I would recommend you stemming out, and creating a stem master for them, which usually includes anywhere from like 4 to 8 tracks of different elements that are grouped together. So don't try to send them every single track that's in your session, but rather send them everything that you have into separate groups that make sense. So like all the basses together, all the effects go together, all of the drum and percussions go together, the kick maybe separately from the bass as well if you need to. But yeah, so that is in a sense how to prepare your track to get ready for mastering. And one thing I want to point out too is that mastering is not the end all be all in terms of like, if your track has a lot of problems, mastering isn't necessarily going to fix those problems. If anything, it might amplify it. And so I highly recommend spending a lot of time on a mix before you send it to a mastering engineer. The reason being is because these people have heard millions of tracks. They are very experienced, and a lot of times some mastering engineers won't really tell you that there's something wrong with your track, and they'll just master it for you and get the job done and call it a day. So number one, make sure that you're working with a mastering engineer that you trust and that you have good communication with, and that you've established how many changes they're willing to do for you, and also that if you're an inexperienced mixing engineer, let them know that as well, so that they can have at least some sort of idea of who they're working with, and You know, if they're using terminology that you're not familiar with, you know, ask for clarity, or just, you know, Google and use YouTube to find different resources to be able to help you out. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention too is, you know, before you send your tracks to a mastering engineer, always share your mixes with people that you trust, your friends, to see if they can give you any final feedback. I know that a lot of times I thought my tracks were done, they were ready to get sent to mastering, and then I share it with a friend, and they point out to me that, you know, I'm missing low end at these frequencies, or that my high end is too high, or that my mids are too muddy. And you know, it can be disheartening sometimes when you think you're at the finish line and you still got more work to do. But at the end of the day, you know, the way I look at it is, whenever you release a track out into the world, it's probably going to be there for the next 100 years or longer. So whatever the work that you have to do in order to get your track done and ready for mastering, I think it's totally worth it. And another thing I want to point out too is, you know, mastering engineers work very, very diligently at making sure that your tracks sound great across every sort of system, speaker, so that's radio ready. So just remember that, you know, mastering is really just a process to get your songs radio ready, whether it be for clubs, whether it be for someone's car, their iPhone, or whatever. They're prepared to make sure that your track sounds great in all those scenarios. But at the same time, don't expect them to remix, quote unquote, your track to make it sound like something completely out of this world, right? Typically, the best masters that I've found are usually the ones closest to the mix that I already have. If they change significantly what your track sounded like, then either there was a lot of problems with your track, or you gave them specific references and said, you know, I want my track to sound like this person, or I want my, you know, master to sound like so-and-so, then sure, you know, then that's a good scenario to be in. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is part one of a 5-part series in mastering. Be sure to check out the next one, and don't forget to like and subscribe.